Hello and welcome back to Exothermic Plays Games. I'm Exothermic and I've been doing a daily countdown of my 366 favorite video games of all time. Coming in at number 9 is Warcraft III. At the start of the month, I released my video for Stormgate, and in that, I talked about how my optimism about the game is rooted in the games for which it is a spiritual successor, which is Blizzard RTS titles. I also mentioned that might seem weird because I hadn't yet ranked any Blizzard RTS titles all year long. Well, here's the first one I'm going to talk about. Real-time strategy is probably my favorite genre, and hot damn, Warcraft 3 is a great real-time strategy game. I'm not going to give my whole spiel about what makes something a Blizzard RTS as opposed to anything else again. I spent enough time on that in the Stormgate video, so here's a very condensed version, and if you want it expanded, just go watch that. You need several factions that all play very differently from one another. You need a campaign that weaves a narrative across each of those factions, allowing you to not only explore most of what those factions have to offer, but also telling a memorable, compelling story that ties the plot to mechanics in fun and interesting ways with varied levels that have exciting objectives. In a broader sense, the game's asymmetrical design needs to be balanced well for multiplayer, creating a plethora of viable options and playstyles, allowing players to not only have a competitive outlet where they can learn all sorts of tips and tricks, but also carve out their own unique way to address the different matchups. And lastly, the game needs strong community support options. I'll touch on that briefly now before getting into everything else. Warcraft 3 shipped with the most robust set of map editing and other custom tools of its time, and that led to people doing a ton with the custom maps. There's entire genres that spawned from Warcraft 3's map editor, and I don't mean like small indie things. Defense of the Ancients is one of the most important things to happen in video game history, creating the entire MOBA genre, leading to things like League of Legends, Dota 2, Smite, and countless other competitors in that space. Those games copied, essentially, then built on top of the original Dota's model, and while that's the most famous example, there's definitely more. But ultimately, I didn't get into Warcraft 3 until well after its heyday. I think we got these games around maybe 2008, 2009, basically after playing a ton of World of Warcraft and wanting to check out the thing that kicked all of the events of the MMO into motion. And that's the main thing I want to talk about here. There are 4 different playable factions in Warcraft 3. There's the Human Alliance, consisting largely of, obviously, humans, but also occasionally you do get some dwarves and elves and stuff helping out. There's the Orcs, which also enlist the help of trolls and Tauren, forming the foundations of the Horde. Then you have the enigmatic Night Elves, embracing nature, relying on things like treants and the like for help, rather than the other traditional races. And then, of course, there's the Undead. Each of these factions get their own full campaign, but they're interconnected, being told in order. The way we move from faction to faction while maintaining the same singular plot is really well done, and the game sets so many things in motion, you'd almost think the plan from the start was to create the largest MMO in the world. Obviously, not quite, but it feels like it. I do want to mention that I'm talking about this game as a whole thing, including the Frozen Throne expansion, so there's actually multiple campaigns for each faction, and it's a really long and awesome story. Don't worry, I'm not going to talk about all of it, and certainly not all of it in detail, but I do really want to talk about how it kicks off. Sometimes I really wonder what the real perception of the characters in these campaigns was when they were originally released. The prologue campaign, Thrall's struggle to find a new home for his people, as leader of the Horde. Now, Thrall is a fascinating character, and he's been very dynamic in WoW. I mean, Green Jesus is a thing, but he was also pretty interesting here, I think. He's named Thrall because, like many orcs, he had been captured by the Alliance and forced into slavery, but he fought and earned his freedom not through just brute strength. Yes, he's strong, but he won through his superior intelligence and wisdom. I really appreciate Thrall because of how he takes the typical big dumb orcs are big and dumb and strong tropes and flips them on their head. He is big and strong, but he's also a spiritual leader as much as he is a political and military one. Thrall's a shaman, connecting to the elements of the earth in order to do things like call down lightning on his enemies. As he raids the human slave camps, he liberates all of his brethren, but then also befriends and saves a tribe of trolls before settling sail for Kalimdor, the lost continent far off to the west. This and the later Orc campaign explain the founding of the city of Durotar and the expansion and formation of the Horde as we know it at the start of World of Warcraft. And it shouldn't come as a surprise if you've been following along on the channel that this game is, still coming up. So it's important to understand how we got there. But the real story here follows Arthas Menethil. The Kingdom of Lordaeron is waist deep in the struggle with the newly founded Horde, and they have some real issues to deal with regarding the safety of their people and long-term survival of their kingdom. The king, Tyrannus, is a benevolent yet proud ruler looked upon fondly by his people. His son, Arthas, is a paladin serving the people to his fullest with his every breath, a shining example of the human spirit. However, one day, the king and his court are visited by a mysterious visitor. This is the same man who visited Thrall with his vision to go west to Kalimdor. Here, he advises Lordaeron abandon its cities and go west as well, for fear of a great shadow descending upon the world. This is a slight spoiler for this game, but that man is actually Medivh, the last guardian of Tirisfal. Guardians were extraordinarily powerful spellcasters imbued with power via their lineage. Medivh is also my favorite character in the Warcraft universe. He's really cool. He was corrupted by demons from birth, and through this corruption failed as Azeroth's guardian, opening the portal for a demonic invasion. I'll for sure talk about him some more in a later video, but he's just absolutely fascinating, and I am in love with his, let's call it a house. We'll call it a house. Arthas is investigating some troubles out near the Orc encampments with Uther, his mentor and leader of the Paladin Order. While out there, they discover undead enemies. There's shambling ghouls, grotesque abominations that are corpses stitched together, and cultist necromancers bringing them to life, and a virulent plague infesting the living. Arthas takes it upon himself to stop this threat, and the wicked lich behind it, Kel'Thuzad. I should talk about the actual gameplay for a minute here. Some campaign missions are installation missions. Basically, you have your hero unit and a handful of supporting units, and you go through with minimal to even no base management, trying to accomplish some objective. This could be escaping from prison, it could be infiltration, but the point is, it's all about the microcontrol of these units. And that's one thing that separates Warcraft 3 from other games, where it's far more about the micro of your most powerful units than most other things in the same space. Time to kill in Warcraft is pretty high, it takes a while, so you have a lot more opportunity to move your army and your units around, but definitely the most important is the management and preservation of your hero. As you play through these campaigns, each of your hero units will gain experience from enemies they kill or side quests you pick up and then accomplish. When they level up, you get to assign 1 point to a skill, either unlocking or improving that skill. Arthas here has a heal, which also damages undead enemies if you cast it on them. He has an always active aura that improves friendly characters' armor. He's got a massive resurrection spell, which is super fun. And he has divine intervention, which I'll always and forever just call Bubble, which makes him immune to damage for a short time. You also can find items throughout the game that the hero can pick up. Some are equipment that modify their stats. There's also like little books that actually are just like, hey, a core stat is up and this doesn't take up an item slot. Those are always great to get because they're just free. And others are unused things like potions that could heal you, or a scroll that teleports yourself and any friendly units near you back to your town hall. Speaking of the town hall, economy management is also done in a very certain sort of way in these Blizzard RTS games. Each faction's a little bit different, and this is where some of the asymmetry comes in, but for humans, you build peasants from your town hall, which are your bread and butter workers, and then go from there. There are two different resources in Warcraft 3. You have gold gathered from mines, and you have lumber gathered from, obviously, trees. One of the really interesting things about how asymmetric this game is that even this is done differently from faction to faction. For humans and orcs, it's pretty similar, though there's some very minor differences. Your worker unit goes back and forth from the mines to the town hall to gather gold, and they can chop down trees, slowly clearing out the map, carrying it back to either the town hall or a lumber mill. Pretty simple. You can construct all sorts of buildings, and there's base management as you increase your number of workers. Barracks train most ground units, and then there's like the Griffin area for some flying stuff. A workshop for siege units, the blacksmith has upgrades. It's pretty straightforward things that make sense based on the names of the buildings. I know this doesn't seem like a lot, but the fact that I've never once had to remotely guess what a building does for the human faction does go a long way. So managing your army and managing your heroes is a lot of fun in Warcraft 3. But one thing that's very different about it that makes it so interesting, though admittedly less of a big deal in the campaigns compared to multiplayer, is upkeep. Based on how many forces you have, you'll have higher upkeep costs, meaning for every resource your workers gather, you only get to keep a certain percentage of it. You can have no upkeep, low upkeep, or high upkeep, potentially losing up to 60% of your income. This encourages being really active on the map, constantly trading army for incremental advantages, or spending your resources on as many upgrades as you can, or static defenses, rather than just more army. While it's interesting, and I don't love this system for multiplayer, and I'll expand on that in a bit, it is great for campaign, creating a far more curated experience regarding the army size, making it harder to just brute force everything and just kind of have the same strategy every time. You have to actually play to the mechanics of the mission, encouraging you to take on these side objectives and focus much more on your hero. Speaking of your hero, what's Arthas been up to? He, Uther, and his friend Jaina, a powerful young mage, have discovered that the plague is being transmitted through infested granaries, and the shipment's already gone out to the large Lordaeron city of Stratholme. Upon their arrival, Arthas decides there's no saving these people, and the plague itself must be stopped, or else it will take over the entire continent, turning all life to the undead, and the city has to be purged. Of course, Uther and Jaina aren't about that, and you're pretty much on your own. The Culling of Stratholme is a remarkable mission and plays to all of the strengths of this game. It's also the turning point in Arthas' long story and sets up like 90% of the coolest story things in World of Warcraft, at least in my opinion. The undead army here is being led by a big demon, a dreadlord named Mal'Ganis. You have to build up your base outside of the city and then run through the city streets and kill everyone there, racing against Mal'Ganis to be the first one to kill 100 citizens. You can, of course, just focus on the buildings and killing people, but I find it much easier to amass a strike force on one hotkey, which in Warcraft 3 holds up to 12 units at a time, to go take out Mal'Ganis and his force while controlling other strike forces on their own hotkeys, taking down the other buildings. The better your multitasking is, the better you're going to do, as Mal'Ganis keeps respawning every few minutes, and you might need intense micro on multiple fronts to do this all at the same time. Sometimes when you destroy the buildings to get to the people and kill them, you instead find like little mini bosses and extra threats, and the mission is full of these little surprises, and I just love the Culling of Stratholme. Stratholme itself is one of my favorite dungeons in all of WoW, and I've spent a lot of time in it. Unfortunately for Arthas, and really the world, Mal'Ganis gets away, escaping to the extreme colds of the continent of Northrend. Arthas chases after him, despite this clearly being a trap, and is well on his way through his descent into total madness. You find some dwarves there, including Myrddin Bronzebeard, brother to the leader of the dwarves, on an expedition. You help him out against the undead that have been trapped there, and he explains they're on an archaeological trip to find a mythical sword called Frostborn. It supposedly grants its wielder incredible power, and Arthas, determined to kill Mal'Ganis, joins them in their search because, hey, sword with incredible power sounds great to kill a demon. However, that search is cut short when we are delivered word that Uther has convinced King Tyrannus to recall the whole expedition and everyone is to abandon Northrend and return home. The Crown Prince hasn't come all this way for nothing, however, and you go on an installation mission recruiting mercenaries like ogres and trolls along the way, burning down all of your own ships. He's gone insane, and his rapid fall from grace is one of the greatest stories in all of gaming. Notably, when you burn down the last ship and the rest of your army arrives, you use the non-human mercenaries as a scapegoat for the whole thing and kill them in cold blood. So the army will go with you to find Frostborn, and then you know, hopefully kill Mal'Ganis. When we do find it, however, Myrddin reads the inscription and discovers that it's cursed, and we shouldn't touch it. Last thing we should do is touch it. Arthas, blinded by his lust for vengeance, isn't having it. Myrddin gets killed, Arthas reclaims Frostborn, and you do kill Mal'Ganis. But clearly, Frostborn is talking to Arthas, and we learn that's the spirit of the Lich King already corrupting the prince's soul through his cursed blade. Arthas has a long journey home and is greeted back at Lordaeron as a triumphant hero. He's clad in the finest furs of the north, his hair bleached white as the snows themselves, and a chill emanates around him. When he arrives in the king's court, he talks a little about how Tyrannus is no longer needed and murders his own father in broad daylight, and so falls the kingdom of Lordaeron. Okay, not quite yet. That's kind of the campaign you do next for the undead. You have a whole campaign with Arthas having joined the undead, leading them in battle, killing the remnants of the kingdom, doing the Lich King's bidding. In fact, Arthas himself is now technically undead, his soul corrupted and gone from Frostborn, now serving as a Death Knight in service of the Lich King. This is what sets everything in motion for basically the next decade at Blizzard Entertainment, and it's some incredible stuff. Arthas wipes out all of the humans in the kingdom, then marches on up to the Elven Kingdom of Silvermoon, leaving a great big scar on the planet. It's pretty cool, actually. Destroying their ancient gates, killing, then turning their beloved general, Sylvanas Windrunner, and claiming power from the Sunwell. However, Arthas made a critical mistake here. In an effort to get the most out of Sylvanas, he decided it was a waste to make her totally mindless and allowed her to retain an amount of her free will so she could make her own tactical decisions and lead his armies where he is not. Through this, she rises against him, liberating some more undead from his control and eventually breaks free from his torment, founding a new faction of undead called the Forsaken, taking residence in the ruins of the Kingdom of Lordaeron. I'll be talking about all of that a whole lot in my WoW video, so just hold on to that. I have a lot of thoughts. This is all great, but what's Thrall been up to? We haven't talked about him in a bit. He establishes Durotar, forges an alliance with the Tauren, and finally creates a home for his people after so many years of pain and loss. But eventually, the demonic invasion that Medivh had warned of does arrive, and through a ragtag alliance of the Horde, faction of humans, I think with Jaina, if I remember right, and the Night Elves, and the Archdemon Archimonde is defeated at the World Tree. Much of this was brought about by the Lich King, working as actually a servant for the demons from afar, acting as their herald. But in actuality, he had his own plans to stop them, and in the aftermath of that, Arthas reaches the Frozen Throne in Northrend, puts on the Helm of Domination, giving him enhanced control over the undead, and becomes the new Lich King, finally completing his total and absolute corruption, finishing the setup for World of Warcraft and its first two expansions. The campaigns for Warcraft 3 are incredible works of art, is a marriage of both cinematic storytelling and excellent real-time strategy gameplay. If you've never really gotten into RTS that much, this is where I'd absolutely suggest you start, because the stories are phenomenal, and the upkeep system really helps keep most of your base and army management from getting like super out of hand. But that's only one thing for this game. The multiplayer is pretty great too. That being said, it's not my most favorite flavor of RTS multiplayer, so I never bothered to really try to get good at it. I've mostly dabbled, but I do enjoy it. When I play multiplayer, I prefer to play as the undead. There's a few noteworthy changes here compared to orcs and humans. For starters, in order to collect gold, you first need to haunt the mine. I think that's just kind of funny. You start off with one already done, but it's an extra step for any later ones. Second, your basic worker unit, acolytes, can't gather lumber and only gather gold or start spawning buildings. They don't construct the buildings over time like the peasants or peons would, however, instead basically casting a ritual that then allows them to build themselves. One of my favorite things about resource gathering as undead is that I never have to stop and count my workers to know if my mine is saturated. They stand in a circle around the thing, and there's clearly marked spots for each acolyte, so it's super easy to know how many more you can just throw on there. You gather wood, actually, with your bread and butter army unit, ghouls. Not only are they competent fighters, allowing for easier base defense, they also gather wood with their razor-sharp claws, and I really appreciate the flexibility this offers as far as like I want to make resource collecting units, I want to make workers, but I also need to make army, and then now I don't even need to think about it. I just get to do both. Supply structures for undead are also very flexible. They're these ziggurats, which can lend to your defensive base organization because they can also be morphed into turrets as well, meaning you'll just incidentally have those. Undead armies are highly mobile with a lot of faster units, and of course the blighted ground spawned by all of your buildings, which slows enemies on it, allowing you to get a better time surrounding them and otherwise outmaneuvering if they get too close to you. I really like having a full hotkey of just a bunch of gargoyles flying around because they can fly really fast and kind of ignore the map, and they're a lot of fun for like hit and run tactics. But one of the biggest reasons I love playing undead is I really like the Death Knight hero unit. Of course, in the campaign, this is represented by Arthas, but it's just some other Death Knight, I guess, in multiplayer. You may have noticed that unlike campaign missions, you don't start with a hero unit in your multiplayer, and you have to spawn one. Each faction has a building for this, and once that's built, you can spend a lot of your supply, though no resources are needed for the first one, to spawn your hero. This takes a while, and there's several different options, but I really cannot think of a reason to grab anything other than the Death Knight first. They have a spell called Death Coil, which heals undead and damages the living. There's a spell called Consume, which kills one of your own friendly units to heal the hero a lot. And there's Unholy Aura, which increases movement speed and health regeneration of all allied units near the Death Knight. Lastly, they can resurrect friendly and opposing units to fight once more for you at a time, and that is a big splashy spell that's super fun. Now, this next thing I'm about to say isn't a criticism of Warcraft III's multiplayer. In fact, it's great that it's so unique and different, as it carves out a really awesome space for itself, and it's just not my general preference, but I still want to do it from time to time. So much of the game is focused on getting your hero ready. There are creep camps throughout each of the maps, and allowing for your hero to gain experience and level up. This is the absolute most important thing you can be doing. It's a really big deal. I personally wish that the early game had more variety, but it's really just all about creeping. But one thing that's interesting is that the creep camps are also one of the main sources of items, and those drops are actually random. So sometimes you do get gear that allows you to kind of do things in a different order than you otherwise would, and with fights you may have otherwise lost. One thing I do really appreciate about Warcraft III's multiplayer, though, is the variety in the maps. Of course, just by nature of collecting lumber, you're kind of editing the map as you go, the trees go away, and that's actually a way to create some interesting strategies regarding harvesting trees to open up new attack paths and the like. But there's a lot more going on. still on the trees for a second, one of the nuances of the Night Elves is that their harvesters, wisps, they're these little spirit dudes, don't actually destroy the trees. They still just collect the lumber, but the trees don't go away. So they have basically infinite lumber and never have to go find new sources. But there's also all sorts of neutral buildings you can find. There's healing and mana wells, which continuously help everything near it. There's goblin merchants who sell you items you might want for your heroes. There's mercenaries who you can hire to get units outside your own faction. I personally really like the tavern, allowing neutral heroes like the Pandaren Brewmaster, who can help shore up weaknesses your faction's hero offers, might not cover. The pace of play for Warcraft 3 is definitely on the slower end of the spectrum, and in this regard, it's nice for multiplayer because I feel like I'm in more control of things, but on the other hand, it does mean that matches can take a bit longer than some other games, especially when you factor in the upkeep mechanic. Now, this isn't inherently bad because you have a lot more interesting back and forth, but it is hard to find the time to play a bunch of multiplayer, which is one of the reasons that I mostly play against computers as opposed to against other people. The other part, the other reason, is that when you are playing against another person that started with the same amount of basically nothing as you, the upkeep mechanic can actually get a bit frustrating to me. Because if you lose efficiencies like that, it can actually determine the result of the whole match, and it's jarring that there will be times when I'm doing nothing, can be doing something, and it's better for me to basically continue doing nothing. I understand the benefits that the upkeep system provide, and they are benefits, and in that regard, it's overall, I think, worth it for keeping games interesting, but I definitely don't play RTS multiplayer to, for me, at any point ever, be doing nothing. I like the multiplayer. I'll still occasionally play against computers, like I said, but don't really care to try laddering and being super competitive with it. But for me, Warcraft 3 is so much more about the brilliant campaign that I've played several times over, and everything else is just a bonus, and that is how this game has gotten ranked so highly. Join me tomorrow as I talk about my 8th favorite game, where I kind of just do this all again, only with my preferred style of multiplayer.
Research complete.